Some criminals show remorse, others beg for forgiveness. But Danta Wright? He laughed in the face of justice itself. On a cold courtroom day in Michigan, this 18-year-old killer sat just feet away from the family of Jordan Klee, end quote, the promising young athlete whose life he'd brutally stolen with a single gunshot. As Jordan's cousin stood at the podium, her voice breaking as she spoke about dreams that would never come true, about a future ripped away in an instant, Wright did the unthinkable. He smiled. He chuckled. He turned this sacred moment of grief into his personal entertainment. What would you do if you were sitting in those wooden benches, watching the person who destroyed your family treat your pain like a joke? How would you react, seeing this cold-blooded killer act like he was watching a comedy show instead of facing the consequences of murder? But Wright's sick performance didn't stop there. When given the chance to address the family directly, he looked them dead in the eyes and delivered words so callous, so utterly heartless, that even seasoned court officials were left speechless. The judge, David Swartz, had seen countless criminals in his courtroom, but nothing had prepared him for this level of pure evil. Would justice finally be served? Or would this remorseless killer continue making a mockery of the system? What happened next left everyone in that courtroom absolutely stunned. Don't let this shocking case fade into the shadows. Subscribe now to uncover the darkest true crime stories before they're forgotten. Ignore this, and you'll miss the truth. Subscribe now, unless you'd rather stay in the dark and pretend it never happened. Before we dive into the darkness of this case, you need to understand exactly what was taken away that October night in 2016. Jordan Klee wasn't just another statistic. He was an 18-year-old senior at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with everything going for him. Jordan was the kind of young man every parent dreams of raising. Energetic, happy, go-lucky, and blessed with a brilliant mind, he excelled in everything he touched. On the football field, he was a force to be reckoned with. In the classroom, he was a scholar who earned the Scholar Athlete Award for academic excellence and the prestigious NAACP Award. His teachers knew him as dedicated and driven. His teammates knew him as loyal and fun-loving. His family knew him as their shining star. This wasn't a kid who was heading down the wrong path. Jordan had his sights set on becoming an engineer, a dream that seemed well within reach given his mechanical aptitude and academic achievements. He lived independently in a condominium complex, showing the kind of responsibility and maturity that made his family proud. The Klee family, his mother, grandparents John and Peggy, Michael and Denise White, half-brothers Maverick Bristol and Austin Faust, and extended family, including aunts, uncles, and cousins, all believed Jordan was destined for greatness. But on the 4th of October, 2016, that bright future came to a horrifying end. A maintenance worker making his routine rounds discovered Jordan's body on a pathway outside his condominium complex. One gunshot wound, one bullet that ended 18 years of dreams, achievements, and love. The young man who had been planning his engineering career just hours before was gone forever. The news sent shockwaves through Pioneer High School and the entire Ann Arbor community. Teachers wept, teammates couldn't believe it, family members were devastated beyond words. How could someone so full of life, so full of promise, be taken in such a senseless act of violence? Think about the young people in your own life. The ones with bright futures ahead of them, the ones making their families proud every single day. Now consider how it would feel to have all of that potential, all of that love, all of those dreams destroyed by one act of pure evil. That's exactly what Jordan Klee's family was facing as they tried to process this unimaginable loss. But their nightmare was just beginning. The clock was ticking. Somewhere in Ann Arbor, Jordan Klee's killer was walking free, thinking he'd gotten away with murder. But investigators were closing in fast, and what they discovered would reveal just how cold-blooded this crime really was. This wasn't some tragic accident or crime of passion. Jordan had been executed during a planned robbery. Someone had looked at this brilliant 18-year-old scholar-athlete and decided his life was worth nothing more than whatever cash he might be carrying. The cruelty of it was staggering. Then came the arrests that stunned the community. 3 young men were dragged away in handcuffs: Danta Wright, Jermarius Ellison, and Delrano Gracie. But here's the part that will make your blood boil. Wright, the triggerman who ended Jordan's life, was only 17 years old when he committed this heinous act. The charges painted a terrifying picture: second-degree murder, armed robbery, conspiracy to commit armed robbery. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. It was planned, calculated, deliberate. They had set out that night knowing they were willing to kill. But why Jordan? What made them choose this particular victim? He wasn't flashing money or jewelry. He wasn't involved in any criminal activity. He was just a kid trying to build a future for himself. Did they target him specifically? Or was Jordan simply the unlucky person who crossed paths with these predators at the wrong moment? The Klee family finally had their answers about who killed their beloved Jordan. They could breathe a small sigh of relief knowing the monsters were behind bars. Justice seemed within reach. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold in that courtroom. Because while most criminals at least pretend to show remorse when facing their victims' families, Danta Wright was different. He was about to prove just how truly evil a human being could be. What he did during those court proceedings would leave everyone questioning whether some people are simply born without souls. The courtroom was packed. Jordan's family filled the front rows, their faces etched with pain that had aged them years in the months since that October night. They had waited for this moment, and again, their chance to look Jordan's killer in the eye and tell him exactly what he had stolen from them. Courtney Klee, Jordan's cousin, rose from her seat and walked slowly to the podium. Her hands trembled as she gripped the microphone. She was speaking not just for herself, but for Jordan's mother, a woman so broken by grief that she couldn't bear to face her son's murderer directly. Jordan had dreams, Courtney began, her voice cracking with emotion. He wanted to be an engineer. He had plans, goals, a future that stretched out before him like an open highway. You took all of that away. As she spoke about the young man they had all loved, about his laughter, his ambitions, his kindness, something absolutely disgusting was happening just feet away. Danta Wright, the 18-year-old killer, wasn't hanging his head in shame. He wasn't showing even a flicker of remorse. He was smiling. Not just smiling, he was actively enjoying himself. As Courtney's voice broke, describing how Jordan's death had shattered their family, Wright leaned back in his chair and chuckled. When she talked about the future that would never come, about grandchildren Jordan would never have, about the engineering marvels he would never create, Wright's grin grew wider. The family members sitting in those wooden benches couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was their loved one's killer, treating their most profound pain like entertainment. Every tear they shed seemed to amuse him more. Every word about their loss made him more comfortable, more cocky, more certain that he held all the power in that room. But Wright wasn't finished with his sick performance. When Courtney concluded her heart-wrenching statement and returned to her seat, wiping tears from her eyes, the judge gave Wright the opportunity to address the court. Most defendants use this moment to apologize, to show some human decency, to at least pretend they understand the gravity of their actions. Wright had something very different in mind. He stood up slowly, that same twisted smile playing across his face. Then he turned to look directly at Jordan's grieving family, the people whose lives he had destroyed forever, and delivered words so callous they seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. "I just wanted to tell y'all," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance, "I'll be home soon. I'll be all right. I love my family." The audacity was breathtaking. While Jordan's family would never see their loved one again, while his mother was so devastated she couldn't even attend her own son's killer's sentencing, Wright was essentially telling them that this was all just a temporary inconvenience for him. How would you react if you were sitting in that courtroom? How would you maintain your composure watching the person who murdered your child, your cousin, your loved one, treat their death like a joke? How would you process the fact that this monster felt so superior, so untouchable, that he could mock your grief to your face? The other people in that courtroom, lawyers, court officers, even hardened journalists who had covered countless criminal cases, sat in stunned silence. They had never witnessed such pure, unadulterated evil on display. But someone else in that room was watching Wright's disgusting performance very carefully. Judge David Swartz had presided over thousands of cases, had seen every type of criminal you could name, and what he was witnessing was about to push him past his breaking point. What the judge did next would leave everyone speechless. Judge David Swartz sat behind his bench, his knuckles white as he gripped his gavel. In his decades on the bench, he had seen rapists, child abusers, and cold-blooded killers. But none of them had ever displayed such brazen contempt for human life, such complete disregard for the suffering they had caused. Wright's performance had crossed every line of human decency. The way he had smiled during that victim impact statement, the way he had mocked a grieving family's pain, and then, the final insult, telling them he'd be home soon while they would never see Jordan again. It was beyond evil. It was pure, sadistic cruelty. The judge's jaw tightened as Wright slumped back in his chair, that same arrogant smirk still plastered across his face. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a complete mockery of the justice system itself. Wright was acting like he owned that courtroom, like the murder of an innocent young man was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Judge Swartz had a plea agreement in front of him. The lawyers had worked out a deal. The paperwork was ready. All he had to do was sign off on the sentencing, and this nightmare would be over. But as he watched Wright's disgusting display, something inside him snapped. "I am tempted," Judge Swartz said, his voice barely controlled, "to reject this plea agreement entirely." The courtroom fell silent. Wright's smirk began to fade. His defense attorney looked up in alarm. Even the prosecutors seemed stunned by the judge's words. "What I have witnessed here today," the judge continued, his anger building with each word, "is the most appalling display of callousness I have ever seen in my courtroom. This defendant has shown not 1 ounce of remorse, not 1 moment of human decency, not 1 sign that he comprehends the magnitude of what he has done." Wright shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time since the proceedings began, his cocky confidence seemed to crack. The judge wasn't just going through the motions. He was genuinely considering throwing out the entire plea deal. And if he did that, Wright would face trial for first-degree murder. He could be looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. The smug teenager who had been laughing at a grieving family suddenly realized that his future hung by a thread. But Judge Swartz faced an impossible choice. Yes, Wright deserved the harshest punishment possible. Yes, his behavior warranted throwing the book at him. But the Klee family had already endured so much pain. Did they deserve to be dragged through months of trial testimony, forced to relive Jordan's murder over and over again in court? The judge stared at Wright for what felt like an eternity. The killer who had been so confident just moments before now sat frozen, finally understanding that his actions had consequences. What would justice look like in this moment? Was mercy for the family more important than maximum punishment for the killer? The judge's decision would determine Wright's fate forever. The tension in that courtroom was suffocating. Judge Swartz had Wright's future in his hands, and everyone knew it. The cocky teenager who had been laughing at a grieving family just minutes before now sat rigid in his chair, finally grasping that his sick performance might have just cost him everything. Judge Swartz made his decision. Despite every fiber of his being wanting to throw Wright to the wolves, he chose compassion, not for the killer, but for the Klee family. He would honor the plea agreement. But that didn't mean Wright was getting off easy. "Danta Wright," the judge announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "you are sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison for second-degree murder." The number hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. 23 to 50 years. Wright would be at least 41 years old before he even had a chance at parole, if he ever got it at all. The teenager who had just told Jordan's family he'd be home soon suddenly realized he had just lost the prime years of his entire life. But the contrast with his co-defendants was striking and revealed everything about their character. When Delrano Gracie faced his sentencing of 15 to 40 years, he did what Wright refused to do. He apologized, not just to his own family, but to the Klees. He looked them in the eye and acknowledged the pain he had helped cause. Jermarius Ellison, also receiving 15 to 40 years, showed a different kind of cowardice. He apologized only to his own family, FMM, completely ignoring the people whose lives he had helped destroy. Like Wright, he couldn't find it within himself to face the consequences of what he had done to Jordan. The sentences were handed down, but questions lingered in that courtroom. Wright, the trigger man who had shown such disgusting contempt for his victim's family, would spend decades behind bars. But was it enough? Can any prison sentence truly balance the scales when a young man full of promise is gunned down in cold blood? Jordan Klee would have been 27 years old now. He might have been married, starting a family, building bridges, or designing the technology of tomorrow. Instead, his life ended at 18 because 3 criminals decided his dreams were worth nothing. 23 to 50 years sounds like a long time. But is it really justice when weighed against a lifetime that will never be lived? The courtroom began to empty, but this story was far from over. As the gavel fell and Wright was led away in shackles, you might think this nightmare was finally over for the Klee family. But sometimes, justice is just the beginning of a whole new kind of torment. Antoinette Carter, Wright's mother, stood outside that courthouse and delivered words that sent shockwaves through everyone who heard them. Her son, the same young man who had laughed during a victim impact statement, who had mocked a grieving family to their faces, who had shown zero remorse for executing an innocent teenager, was completely innocent, according to her. "My son didn't do this," she declared, her voice filled with conviction that seemed to defy reality itself. "We're going to appeal this verdict. The truth will come out." The truth? The truth was that her son had pleaded guilty to murdering Jordan Klee. The truth was that he had admitted to pulling the trigger that ended a promising young life. The truth was that he had shown such callous disregard for his victim's family that even a seasoned judge was left speechless. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. What happens when a mother's love becomes so blind that it refuses to see the monster her child has become? How do you process watching someone deny reality so completely when the evidence is overwhelming? For the Klee family, Carter's words must have felt like salt being poured into wounds that were just beginning to heal. They had endured Wright's courtroom performance, his mocking laughter, his arrogant dismissal of their pain. Now they had to face the possibility that this ordeal might not be over at all. An appeal could mean years of legal battles. It could mean relitigating Jordan's murder, dragging his family through court proceedings all over again. It could mean watching Wright's lawyers try to convince another judge that the young man who had shown such contempt for human life deserved a second chance. The question that haunted everyone involved was simple but terrifying. What if somehow, some way, Wright's appeal succeeded? What if legal technicalities or procedural errors gave this remorseless killer another shot at freedom? And what about the Klee family? How long could they be expected to relive their worst nightmare? How many times would they have to fight for justice for Jordan? The courthouse doors closed, but the battle for Jordan Klee's memory was far from over. Would Wright's arrogance finally catch up with him, or would the system fail his victim one more time? Today, Jordan Klee would be 27 years old. He should be designing buildings, creating innovations, maybe holding his own children. Instead, his life remains frozen at 18, a brilliant future cut short by 3 criminals who saw him as nothing more than a robbery target. The Klee family continues to carry the weight of that October night in 2016. Every birthday Jordan will never celebrate, every milestone he'll never reach, every dream he'll never fulfill, time. It all serves as a constant reminder of what Danta Wright stole from this world. Wright sits in prison, serving his 23 to 50-year sentence, but his courtroom performance revealed something far more disturbing than just another teenage killer. It showed us what pure evil looks like when it has no fear of consequences, no respect for human life, and no understanding of the pain it causes. The community of Ann Arbor lost more than just a promising young man that night. They lost their sense of safety, their belief that good things happen to good people, their faith that monsters like Wright are rare exceptions rather than walking among us every day. But Jordan's story doesn't end with his death. It lives on in the memories of those who loved him, in the dreams he inspired in others, and in the warning his case provides about the kind of evil that exists in this world. What are your thoughts on this case? Should Wright have received a harsher sentence, or was justice served? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking true crime stories that expose the darkness hiding in plain sight.